But I don't want to go into that methodology. I want to talk about an article that Chantal and I wrote in Leadership magazine last year in February. We noted people's anxiety about the future, so we had a great title for the article. We wanted to call it "For Fox's Sake," but the editor of the magazine felt this was not in keeping with the dignity. And so we called it "The World and South Africa Beyond 2010." So what do we say in this article? Because it illustrates to a T the difference between being a hedgehog and a fox. We said that the world has been in a long boom scenario since 1982. I mean, that's a long time. It's 25 years because it ended in 2007. And yeah, in the 20th century, there was never a boom like the one we've just had. The phrase long boom was first dreamed up by an American scenario planner called Peter Schwartz, who was Pierre's successor at Royal Dutch Shell and who now lives in Palo Alto, California, which, as I always say to him, is interesting for a futurist since it's smack in the middle of the San Andreas Fault. But Peter came up with this expression, long boom, in 1983. And he gave two reasons for the possibility that the world could have an unparalleled period of prosperity for the remainder of the century. And he was right on the money with both of the reasons. The first reason he gave was the rise of the East. At the time it was Japan. Japan had a fantastic run in the 70s, 7 to 8% economic growth. They repeated it in the 80s, and then the property bubble burst in 1989 in Japan. I mean, it had to burst because at one stage the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo was worth more than the entire real estate of California. And yeah, they've never really recovered from that. I mean, the Nikkei index in December 1989 was 40,000. Even today, the Nikkei index is still a little over 10,000. So, I mean, basically, if you'd invested in the late 80s in Japan, you'd have lost 75% of your wealth today. That's how long a stock market crash can last. But of course, the Asian tigers took over in the 90s. They had a great run. Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, Malaysia, and then they ran into financial difficulties at the turn of the century. And the two Asian heavyweights stepped in, China and India. So we've had this incredible infusion of energy from the East. It's meant that the global economy has on average grown at 3.5% per annum since 1982, and more recently it's sometimes at over 5% per annum. The second reason that Peter gave was that we were on the cusp of a new technology that he called microelectronics, the science of turning large objects into small objects by miniaturizing the circuits. And at the time, the only thing that microelectronics had produced was the Betamax video cassette recorder. So it was quite prophetic, because in the late 80s came the personal computer, and the personal computer led to the internet. And then quite separately, cell phones, which have led to Blackberries, iPods, iPhones, and all the gadgets that we use today. So the combination of new players from the East plus a new technology creating new markets has meant, in the words of Harold Macmillan, a former British Prime Minister, we've never had it so good. If you couldn't make money in the late 90s, you'll never make money. But now this is the point. But now comes the crunch. Hedgehogs thought the boom would last forever because it was so long. And that's why all those American bankers who are paid zillions of dollars for being so intelligent nearly bankrupted all their businesses. If the American government hadn't actually stepped in, or the British government for that matter, most American depositors and British depositors would have lost all their money. Because, of course, the big idea was that you could lend to dodgy borrowers because it didn't matter. In 2 years' time, you repossess their houses at a higher price, and then you extinguish the mortgage. And that was the vision and mission statement. And of course, it revealed just how dangerous hedgehogs can be, because they can collectively lead their companies over the edge of a cliff. And they did. And yeah, I must say, in our industry, we had mining industry, we had a similar thing. We had a scenario called stronger for longer. It's like an ad for a sex aid. And it was a sort of, you know, commodity prices would go up and up and up and up and up because China and India would increase demand so much. So it didn't matter buying a mine anywhere in the world. Eventually it would be viable. And of course, you know, commodity prices really responded very negatively to the recession. And yes, they're going up again, but you know, not to the levels that were foreseen in the sort of stronger for longer scenario. As Foxes, we in 2005, April 2005, in the book Games Foxes Play, offered people an alternative scenario. We called it Hard Times. Now, it's no good just putting an alternative scenario on the table, because people then say, you know, you're just copping out. You're saying on the one hand and on the other, and you know that wonderful phrase, give me a one-armed economist. You know, people don't like just being given different scenarios. So what you have to do is provide the flag that would indicate you're moving from one scenario to another scenario. And the flag we chose was declining asset values in the United States. We basically said that American consumers have been spending more because they could borrow more. And they could only borrow more if they were worth more, because the household debt to income ratio in America had gone over 100%. That servicing your debt was more than your income, and therefore you could only borrow more if you were worth more. And if particularly house prices in America started turning, that would indicate that American consumers were about to stop spending. And since American consumers represent 70% of the American economy, and the American economy is 25% of the global economy, that would have global repercussions. And in January 2007, the property market started declining in the United States. Now, a flag doesn't go up on 1 month, but it declined for 6 months in a row. So by June 2007, we were giving a 50% probability to the hard time scenario to all the clients that we addressed. Even though the Dow Jones Industrial Index was on its way up to 14,000, we were turning bearish. But notice, we did not change our forecasts. We were running 2 scenarios in parallel, which is exactly what Foxes do, because they keep multiple scenarios in mind. And yeah, then the stock market itself in America started declining in October 2007. So by December 2007, we were giving an 80% probability to the hard time scenario. And I was asked to speak at a Christmas function in Cape Town for an asset management company. I gave them this analysis, and I said 2008 will probably be a horrible year. And the CEO of the company came up to me afterwards and said, "How dare you say that to my clients, Clem? This is supposed to be the season of good cheer." Well, 2008 was a horrible year. And we moved fully into the hard times scenario. So what is it? Well, we call it the corrugated U. It's a long recession. It's not a short one, but it can be punctuated with little sort of waves and going up, going down. And the reason we feel it is a long experience is that what created the hard times scenario is the magnitude of debt in America. Well, in the article we wrote in Leadership, it was $48 trillion at the time. That's if you add business to government to consumer debt, household debt, I think they call it, in America. Today, if you Google total US debt, you'll see the figure is $57 trillion.